Take credit for automatic dude with a shirt in the sun, takes the keys and just looks back.
What were we listening to? We were listening to the Silver Bullet being applied there to my band Rocket Gold Star. The Silver Bullet is from Louder Than Liftoff and is a curious device. It is a stereo tone amp. Hello, I'm Gaz Williams, this is SonicLAB, and we're going to be looking at this interesting mastering tracking device. And I say interesting, it's actually, for me, it's been a bit of an education. I should explain. What this thing essentially is two distortion channels, really. You can call them distortion, that's maybe a bit harsh, but two kind of amplification channels, one based on a Neve and one based on an API, which I think is quite cool because Neve is the classic British console and API is the classic American console. So really this device, what it does is it puts your sterile digital audio through an analog circuit that emulates one or the other of those classic consoles. Now, they've got really good quality transformers from Cinemag and Ed Anderson, so you know it's made of the good stuff. And one of the things that's particularly nice about this is that you can actually cascade the API circuit into the Neve or the Neve into the API, and then those things allow you to dial just the right amount in. What is the difference between the API and the Neve? Well, that's something that I found to be really illuminating. The API sounds much more crispier and transient. The Neve sound a little bit more bloom, a little bit more warmth. And we'll demonstrate this as close as we can. But these things are quite subtle and YouTube may not be the best way to evaluate the difference. But hopefully you'll hear that this thing though does an enormous stuff to your audio. Now, I've got it connected to the SSL6. Now you may have seen our review for this SSL6, but we've subsequently expanded it with the D-Sub expanders. I think it cost around £80 to do that. I would say having put the expansions on, that's super important, really useful, especially if you are going to interface it with high quality external gear such as the Silver Bullet, because the Silver Bullet is something that excels in the way that it can connect to your gear. So the SSL6 has switchable insert points on the channels, and it also has a switchable master input. Now this works really well with the different inputs that are available on the Silver Bullet, because if we look at the back of the Silver Bullet, we can see that there's two microphone preamplifiers, which is fantastic because this thing really, although it seems most suited for mastering processes, you can also use it as a really interesting way of getting a very nice coloured microphone input. So we can have like lots of drive on that input channel, and also the EQ. Now the EQ on this device is quite subtle, but as we'll see later, adds extra special sparkle. Now the next, we can see we've got our track inputs and then we've got our mix inputs. Why you've got all of these inputs means that you don't really need to patch it around. If we look on the SSL, when I switch it in on the insert here, I just need to make sure that I'm on track here. So therefore I've got a stereo track processor. Then when I switch in the insert here, then switch it into mix on here, then we've got our mastering kind of mix bus processing. So we haven't had to do any patching at all. Now that's really brilliant because it means that the Silver Bullet can live in different parts of the production process, again, without having to patch anything. Now, I mentioned the tone controls, and let's have a little look at the tone controls because it is quite simple, yet it's beautiful. Typically, I always end up giving a little bit of a smiley face just because these EQs, you know, they're just basically, you got a low shelf and a high shelf, switchable tone in, and the low shelf can be switched from a bass frequency of given around 60 Hertz, or the sub frequency around 30 Hertz, or the treble control can be set to air, which is like really super high up, and then presence, which is around 4K. Now as I say, we can switch this in and out, but this is flanked by a tight and a vintage control. Now what the tight is a low cut filter, which is around 20 hertz, but it's based on this old design that gives a really lovely little resonant bump around 40 hertz. So although you're cutting the subsonics, you are giving a teeny little bass bump there. And I found I just leave it in all the time. Similarly with the vintage. The vintage engages a top end cut, very high up, but it's designed to emulate a Neve console and what that does to a top end, which is variously described as being silky and smooth. So I leave that in, and I leave the tight in, and the tone control I generally leave in too, typically with the bass engaged and with the presence engaged, but you know, different material is a very subtle thing, and because you don't have an awful lot of control, it helps you make those decisions. And in fact, speaking of making decisions, being able to go between the API and the Neve, that is such a simple thing to do. It's really lovely because, as we'll hear in a moment, it does make quite a nice difference, more than I was expecting. I typically don't do a lot of the cascading, purely because I really love the sound of either the API or the Neve. But when you do want to push things a little bit more, then having this cascading option is certainly interesting. In the intro piece there, I was toggling between an unprocessed recording and the processed recording. So here, for instance, as I solo it, this is the unprocessed. And that's the processed. Now, straight away, you can see an enormous amount of gain has been acquired from this, which I was really surprised about. I'm assuming that a certain amount of the transients have been kind of rolled off by the Silver Bullet, but I was really surprised how juicy I could get it. So I've left the volume difference deliberately here so you can hear how much gain you can get. Now let's listen to the stereo image, because something quite interesting happens. The unprocessed. The processed. Apart from the added gain, the stereo image just seems to get a lot bigger. Now, I think it's something to do with the slight differences in the left and right channel, just making anything that was panned center have an accentuated difference between the left and the right. Now, in the manual, they say they've made some little tweaks to add some little bit of fairy dust to the stereo imaging, but they don't actually say what they do. But what is for certain is the fact that the Silver Bullet does lovely things to the stereo. As I say, it seems to just enhance whatever stereo is in the track. Now, I've also got that little low end going on there. There's a little bit of distortion as well on the mix, and I've been finding that it's quite a pleasing quality, the distortion. So when it starts to break up a little bit, it kind of works with this kind of music because there's a bit of an attitude to it. But by adjusting the knobs, you can dial it in a very precise way, because there are little clicks as you move these knobs. So you can get them to feel like I'm going to move it down 2 clicks, 3 clicks, move it back up 3 clicks. So that helps you make those micro adjustments and be able to remember just how much you've applied or you've taken away. And it is a balancing game. I think it's a little bit like being a safe cracker. You can just find this right place and suddenly it all comes together and sounds really beautiful. It seems to put the rock and roll in. Now, they have the switch on there, says mojo, and I think that's actually quite good, because I definitely feel it does add some mojo. Let's give another musical example. Okay, so if I play the unmastered one here.
Kitty, oh kitty, lost your claws on the apple tree.
Okay, and again.
Kitty, oh kitty,
seems to bring the right things forward. It just, I've been trying to emulate it with digital processors, and you can get somewhere close, but it's the fact that pretty much everything that you do just kind of works straight away, where you have to really look for it in digital. And I think that's part of the huge appeal of something like this, is that it instantly gives you the results and gives you enough flexibility to tweak it to your taste. So I think this little song now that I'm playing is a good candidate for the API. Now we'll go to the Neve and we'll listen to the difference, because there's well, especially the second section now, there's a Baldwin electric harpsichord, which is very spiky sound. Now that'll sound very different through the API and through the Neve. So let's jump to that part. API. Neve. API. Neve. API.
Save all the gems.
Yeah, so to my ears, the API is a brighter sound and more of the transients come through. The Neve brings like a bit more heft and a bit more thickness. Now this is quite subtle because I'm not pushing it too hard, so there's quite a lot of EQ added, but the difference that this is quite a subtle thing. I typically find though that one or the other works really nicely. I'll play the same part again now, and this time we'll listen to the summing of the API into the Neve, and then we'll listen to the Neve into the API. I'll probably have to back off the controls a little bit to get it to sit nice. API into Neve. Neve into API. Back. Again, quite subtle, but interesting. The API into the Neve sounded softer. The Neve into the API sounded a little bit more edge onto there. So the way that they interact with each other certainly gives you interesting but subtle differences. So I think it's definitely a case of trial and error, really. Let's have a little listen to the tone controls. So at the moment, there's a bit of bass and there's a bit of treble put in there. Let's toggle that in and out.
Kitty, oh kitty,
Without.
lost your
With.
on the apple tree.
Without.
Won't you come back
With.
to me?
Low to top end.
Leave your mind. Kitty, oh kitty,
Backing it right off.
lost your claws on the apple tree. Won't you come back to me? Leave your mark. Kitty, oh kitty, lost your claws on the apple tree.
Have to find a different part for the bass, but that treble definitely brings something nice. Okay. Bass. Centered, cut, dial him in. Ah, yeah.
Save all the gentle ones.
Out.
Hold their hearts and try to have.
It's adding some gain as well, so that is definitely lifting it up, but it's also adding to the excitement. I feel that they've got that tone, those tone controls just spot on, and typically everything I'm doing is ended up with similar amounts there. Occasionally I am backing off more top end, but the way it opens up just sounds lovely. It's all very interactive really with the way that the filters are set, and I think that the turnover points that they've chosen is very, very musical, and I think that musicality is something that is paramount in the Silver Bullet's design. Pretty much everything you do has some sort of musical value. Now, we should just do one more thing with it before we move on to the microphone preamps, and that's just let's just push both preamps quite hard and see what they do when they start to break up. I'm going to back off the volume when I increase the gain. Okay, hear the crunch now. API. Okay, to the Neve. Darker. Okay, let's go back to the API. Back to the Neve. API into Neve. Whoa! Neve into API. Wow. Yeah, maybe overcooking things somewhat. Actually, you could really hear just how different they are when they go into the different orders there. But certainly quite interesting. Clearly way too much distortion there, but you can hear the characters of the distortions being quite different. You can certainly hear the brighter quality of the API versus the warmer, darker Neve. Most interesting and also, crucially, most useful. Okay, so I've got the Lewitt LCD 640 going into a radial JS3. Now that's a mic splitter. Now the reason I'm doing that is I'm running the output into the Silver Bullet out of one of the outputs, and another of the outputs is going into a channel on the SSL. So we're basically recording the same microphone into the two preamps. Now I should first of all disable Mojo and the tone controls entirely. So what we're going to be listening to now is just a direct comparison of the preamps. Okay, so now I'm going to engage the Mojo, and I'll bring in all the tone controls too. Yeah, okay. And let's do a little bit more recording. So here's the recordings. I've normalized them. So this is the sound of the SSL. Switching over. Okay, so they sound fairly similar actually. The SSL preamp typically is trying to be clean and fairly uncoloured. So the Silver Bullet one too sounds pretty uncoloured too. Now, let's jump to the interesting stuff though. So this is the SSL, and then I'll switch in the Silver Bullet. This time the Silver Bullet with all the goodies turned on. Here we go. So what we notice is that waveform is quite a lot different after it's been through the Silver Bullet. We can see just how much bigger it is. Clearly the process is taking off some of those transients and allowing the tracks to sound a bit bigger and fuller. I think that it's, in the case of this acoustic guitar, it didn't sound too hot, but once it's through this stuff, again, bypass it. There's a lot of rock and roll in that box, that is for sure. So the Silver Bullet from Louder Than Liftoff. What do I think of it? Well, I think it's incredible. I love it. I mean, it is a boutique piece of equipment, you know. You won't find this in Lidl or Aldi, but it is, you know, a quality investment. I mean, at around $2,099, and I think probably by the time you get one maybe into Britain, it may be a little bit more. It's not cheap. However, the two mics in there, being able to put it through this amount of colorization is a pretty amazing thing on its own. But if you consider it as a mastering device, then that is a fabulous thing. I've done commercial mastering for 20 years now. I have worked on literally hundreds of projects, and I wish I'd have had one of these from the beginning, because a lot of the time what I'm looking to achieve in the mastering process is almost a knitting together of things, bringing the sound together in such a way it feels cohesive and the energy is all in the right place. It feels like that kind of result happens almost without trying on the Silver Bullet, and yet when you start to delve in and play with the safe combination of the different levels of things, you hit sweet spots all along the way. But when you find exactly the right one, then it is like, this is the Silver Bullet or the Magic Bullet. It really does something quite remarkable. As I say, I've tried to do similar things in digital, and I have to work for it. This just happens, and it just gives and gives and gives. So big thumbs up from me. I mean, I think there's usually a waiting list when you go to look to buy these, because there's only a couple of people making them. However, it's a beautifully made piece of equipment that I think would make anybody very proud. Yes, a very desirable object indeed. Anyway, I am Gaz Williams. This has been SonicLAB. Thank you so much for joining us, and catch you soon. Bye-bye.